Hello and welcome to the Tennessee Informer. I'm your host, Dave Vance. Our guest tonight is Steve Curtis, founder of Wormhaven Technologies, a local company that we wanted to introduce you to tonight. But first, if you have an announcement from a conservative organization that you would like to broadcast on this show, please send information to keyinformer.tv@gmail.com the Friday before the show. The Henry and Stewart County chapter of the TFA will meet this Thursday, April 4th, 7 p.m. at Holly Fork Shooting Complex located at 6133 Highway 79 in Paris. We'll give updates on legislation, and the Henry County mayoral candidate Randy Geiger and County Assessor candidate Scott Morrison will be our speakers. Steve Curtis is the founder of Wormhaven Technologies, and his capabilities include PC repair, software development, web hosting, or systems engineering and design. Formed as an SM LLC in December of 2023, he began to branch out into the 3D printing sphere. Thanks for being with us today. I think that we've known each other for at least 10 years, if not longer, so I can vouch for your honesty. Tell us some about your company.
Thanks, David. I just wanted to, come on here and kind of give a quick breakdown on what Wormhaven Technology is about. So originally, we started out in 1999. It was kind of a PC repair kind of thing that me and my wife were doing on the side. We were both working full-time at manufacturing jobs, actually. Over time, we've done a little bit of everything from software design, helping stand up websites and host websites for various organizations. Wasn't until late 2023 that went ahead and formed the single member managed limited liability company for Wormhaven Technologies. And its primary focus at this time is 3D printing and additive manufacturing. Our primary goal has always been empowering others, whether it's just, getting grandma back on the internet, helping others with more complicated solutions, whether it be cloud and now cloud-to-cloud communications or identity management solutions. It's always been about empowering, individuals and businesses to do more. The 3D printing sphere is still a continuation of that. Sure, we're going to have some things that are more games related and, cute things like the Lithophanes and things like that, which we can get into in a little bit here. But one of the other major focuses is for smaller businesses to give them the kind of capability on a smaller scale, whether it's, handout tokens, keychains, bookmarks, just little things to help them, spread their own brand.
Right.
So current products, right now we're doing engineering prototypes, kind of delve a little bit with some robotics and things like that, providing the structure used for the electronics to write in and things. Customizable branded products like bookmarks, keychains are currently a work in progress. Lithophanes. Lithophanes are kind of a really neat side item. I guess it's an older technology that's really been kind of reinvented with the newer technology. With the SLA printing, we also support tabletop board games, role-play tokens and miniatures, board game replacement parts. I mean, how many people have gotten like a really, really old board game that they love and they just need, they've lost that one piece or whatever to keep it from being complete?
Yep.
We can reproduce a replacement part.
Cool.
We can also provide, if you got the SLA, we can either make the mold or we can make the core components for costume jewelry. Stereolithography, obviously, yes, challenged for some folks to say. High detail for smaller scale products. Perfect for your miniatures or, jewelry or really detail-oriented designs. Lithophanes, or as we like to call them, sun catchers, they were handcrafted way back in the turn of the other century, 1900s. They were made from porcelain.
Right.
And can you imagine the amount of hours you had to spend carving out of porcelain to get a nice black and white, crisp image once you put a lamp behind it? Now we can have full color lithophanes. You put a light behind them, and you can see a picture crystal clear.
That's like what you gave my wife, the that picture of all of our grandkids that hangs in the kitchen window.
Yeah.
Yeah, it turned out really well, really well. And
Thank you.
You mentioned a keychain. This is an example. Obviously, it could be it could be a different size, but this is an example of some of the level of detail that you can do. So you could do that with pretty much anything, I take it.
Yeah. So future products that we're currently got lined up, taking lithophanes and housing them inside of a lamp, where you can just turn it on and off. You don't have to have it sitting in the window. You can have it sitting there on your coffee table.
Cool.
A single pane lithophane with a light. There are existing models out there for those. I've just never been a fan of any of them. They're all kind of chintzy, to be fair. Cameo keychain is kind of a new thing that I'm prototyping right now. It's the same concept as your sun catcher that hangs in the window, except this is to hang on your keychain. And it kind of, because of the outer texture of your lithophanes, you can almost feel the picture that's underneath it. Because of that textured, whatever, coating that's on the outside, it has the appearance of your original cameo brooches. You remember some of your older 80s, 60s, 70s cameos that would come out that had the nice little ivory of whether it was a woman or whatever. Right. Well, this is the same concept. It's got the texture. The only difference is, of course, you could hold it up to the light and actually see the picture behind it. New frames are always being developed for the window designs, for the things that you hang up in your window. The most current one is what I call the Bad Kitty. It's basically a cat paw print with the claws out of it, except it looks like the sides of the frames have been shredded. If anybody that's ever had a cat knows that, your cats will claw your furniture if you don't get the claws removed. So that's pretty much in a nutshell what we have right now in, whether it's in progress or they're currently available.
Now you can do these different things with different materials though, right?
Right. Yeah, there's from the FDM side, which is the fused deposition modeling, your lithophanes, your lamps, your keychains and the like. We have different materials there that we can work with, whether it's PVA, PLA, PETG, other carbon fiber types for added strength and resiliency. But your more flexibility with multicolor printing can be done with PLA or PETG basics.
What's PLA and PGT? What are those?
PETG is actually the same material you can find your drinks come in. For example, the 2-liter bottle or whatever. There's actually a process that can be used to take the 2-liter bottle and convert it into filament that can be printed, and that's the material that it's food safe. Like when we do beekeeper frames, we can take and make the newer designs for those, except we use something like PETG. We also have materials like ABS, which high resiliency outside for outdoor applications. There's another type of material that's come out that is more for aerodynamics and drone-based applications, from like hobbyist airplanes and things like that. Let's see. Yeah, there's a lot of different materials and a lot of flexibility with the more modern fused deposition printers.
So are the things you're describing, are those cheaper now with this 3D printing, or about the same as however you might do it, assuming you could do it with other technology?
So consumer grade 3D printers, kind of like the models that I'm using, they're running you around $1,200, $1,300 a piece. They got some more industrial grade printers. Now they're significantly more expensive, somewhere between $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 a printer.
No, but I mean
Obviously,
the products that you can make with them. You mentioned like something with the beekeeping frames that you were able to do.
We can make some of those, using materials like ABS or PETG. Yeah. Your finer detail you're going to get on your stereolithography.
Okay. And so you can do everything from what? Bookmarks, keychains. You mentioned the lithographs. So what should somebody maybe give us a few examples of what some of these things might cost? Obviously that would vary, I would imagine, by size and material.
So like, for example, the keychain, the sample there that you had there, I can do 16 in a batch. I didn't actually do a price breakdown of those particular ones. But like, for example, the lithophane plus the frame is about $25. Smaller objects like that, your initial design, let's say Tennessee Informer decide, hey, we want to have a batch of these keychains made up with our logo, right? Well, if I was just doing one, that would probably be a $30 to $40 job just for the single unit. Now, right. You wanted to order a batch of, say, 50 of them. That's going to drop considerably, right? Because as I do batches of 16 at a time, the cost for me to make them goes down considerably. So like the bookmarks, for example, I think I was able to do them at like $1.50 a piece. And that was including, compensating time for the design and translation from a 2D image into a three-dimensional model that can be printed.
Right. Now, the lithograph that you gave us, if I remember correct, it's probably maybe 6 inches long and maybe 3.5 wide, somewhere around that size. What would something like that cost?
The lithophane itself, just the pane by itself, is $20. Basic out of the box frame, I can do those for like $5. The more custom frames, like the Valentine frame or the puppy dog frames or something like that, where it has the paw prints on it, and multicolor frame colors, those now they're going to run around $8 to $10.
Okay. Well, I can tell you the detail on the litho, what you did for us is really good. I mean, it's a photo of all of our grandkids, and you can see it really clear. It's really good.
Right. So that would be the puppy dogs on the side there. That's an example of a lithophane sitting in front of basically a desk lamp. Okay.
Well, so what are your plans? Obviously, you're just now getting into the 3D printing, but have you got any timelines or anything upcoming you want to let the audience know about?
Look for the keychain cameos to be coming soon. Right now, it's in product design. Well, mainly it's mostly under stress testing right now.
Right.
Is to make sure that, number one, it can go on a keychain and move and be flexible like you expect any kind of fob to be on a keychain, right? You want it to move around, but at the same time, you want it to be able to stay there for, a while. You don't want it to be pulled out of your pocket, it get left behind somewhere.
Right. Okay. You have a website that you want to show again to the audience?
Yeah, that would be wormhaven.com. You can also reach me at contact@wormhaven.com. And yeah, really appreciate you having me on this afternoon.
Hey, I appreciate you coming on, and good luck in your business. And we'll have you back sometime, see how things are going. And once again, I thank you for taking the time with us today.
Appreciate it, sir. You'll have a great week.
All right, you too. Now for legislative updates and commentary. I've got one bill that's not on this list here, and it's SB 2804. It was by Senator Hensley. It was in the State and Local Government Committee today, if I recall correctly. Anyway, this was the one that had to do with we call it the FBI bill. You may recall a couple weeks ago I had former FBI agent Steve Friend on here to talk about this legislation. Also had Representative Todd Warner on here last week to talk about this legislation. And basically the gist of it was that when it came to anti-terror task force from the FBI, that because of what the FBI has pretty much declared in terms of domestic terrorism, I mean, pretty much anybody that's on the wrong side politically is potentially a domestic terrorist. The thought was there should be some way to limit that initially to where the county sheriffs would not put their deputies on that particular task force. They would still be able to cooperate with them, with the FBI on any terror issue, and they were, had a free hand on all the other task force, but we didn't want them to actually take part in that task force as a special agent, because then the sheriff, since he may not have a secret clearance, which was required, he may not really know what's going on with his deputies. And so they pretty much lose control of them. They fall under the FBI, and we've seen quite a bit of abuse by that agency in the last few years. And well, that was the amendment from last week. Well, they didn't like that, so the Representative Warner and others decided, okay, we're going to change it. And basically, the whole thing was the sheriff would have to be involved throughout the whole process. He could have his deputies involved with it, but he would have to be involved. Well, that was not good enough. That was not good enough, because that legislation today in the Senate Judiciary couldn't even get a motion. You have to have a motion in a committee, and then you have to have a second before you can even talk about it. So, and I don't have all the names for you, but look for that. It'll be out there. It's a shame that something like that's designed to protect the public from an out-of-control federal agency. It's a shame that our state elected leaders, or at least the ones in that committee, didn't think that was important enough to support. Along those same lines, SB 0574, which was the bill that was designed to prevent our state government, in the event of another emergency, from declaring somebody who had a lawful occupation as non-essential, that was defeated in committee yesterday. That was in the Senate State and Local Government Committee. You had 5 Republicans vote against it. You had 2 Republicans vote for it. The sponsor, Representative Pody, voted for it. Senator Pody voted for it. Senator Lowe voted for it. 2 Democrats joined Senator Briggs, Senator Stevens, and I forget the other senators that voted against it. And then there were 2 Republicans that did not vote, Senator Jackson and Senator Yeager. So apparently they feel it's important. They feel that it's more important that the governor have a free hand than people with lawful occupations not be prevented from working during an emergency. So I have a real problem with that, and you should too. So as a matter of fact, I do have the names here. It was Senator Briggs, Senator Wally, and Stevens joined Democrat Senators Kyle and Yarbo killing the legislation. Senator Jackson and Senator Yeager voted present not voting, which that whole present not voting thing is a crock as well. So that bill is dead for this year. We certainly hope it's brought back next year. Nobody should be told that their occupation is non-essential. And let's not forget, the opposing the legislation or voting present not voting, I guess they're unaware of our state's Declaration of Rights in the Tennessee Constitution that they swore to uphold. More than likely, they don't realize it, or they just don't care. Apparently, making the governor is more important to them than upholding their oath or being able to support, or for you being able to support your family during an emergency. And let's just refresh a little bit. Section 1 of our Tennessee Declaration of Rights. All power is inherent in the people, and all free governments are founded on their authority and instituted for their peace, safety, and happiness. For the advancement of those ends, they have at all times an unalienable and indefeasible right to alter, reform, or abolish the government in such manner as they may think proper. Section 2. The government being instituted for the common benefit, the doctrine of non-resistance against arbitrary power and oppression is absurd, slavish, and destructive of the good and happiness of mankind. Section 23, that the citizens have a right in a peaceable manner to assemble together for the common good, to instruct their representatives, and to apply those invested with the powers of government for redress of grievances or other proper purposes by address of remonstrance. They need to hear about this one from us. Remember too, if you're not instructing your state legislators on important issues, they are still being instructed by feckless state leaders, the Chamber of Commerce, numerous lobbyists, and other well-heeled scum that roam the halls of the Capitol. Article 16, this is still the Tennessee Constitution. The Declaration of Rights hereto prefixed is declared to be part of the Constitution of the state and shall never be violated on any pretense whatever, to include emergencies. And to guard against transgression of the high powers we have delegated, we declare that everything in the Bill of Rights contained is accepted out of the general powers of the government and shall forever remain inviolate. So, like I said, they either don't know what their oath requires or they don't care. Once again, I mentioned the FBI task force bill that was defeated. That's disgraceful as well. That was House Bill 2912. It was still alive in the Senate until he got killed. He's still alive in the House until he got killed in the Senate earlier today. I can't adequately cover all the pending legislation, good or bad, in an hour or even 2 hours. Recommend the following links for anything having to do with nullification. I recommend tncss.weebly.com. Sign up for the Substack letter. We will let you know when SB 2775 and House Bill 2795 is scheduled for summer study. For all Second Amendment related bills, I recommend TennesseeFirearms.com. For legislation covering a variety of topics, I recommend TennesseeEagleForum.org and TennesseeStands.org. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about tonight about our Constitution and what they tell us our system is. The version, or the perversion of our Constitution that we are told is our system, is a suicide pact by the way they describe it. We have been told that the Supreme Court is the final arbiter of all constitutional issues and that all federal laws trump all state laws. In fact, much of the division in our country, especially since the 60s, has been the result of Supreme Court decisions. If you look at the border situation today, especially in Texas, the state and our nation are being overrun by illegal aliens due primarily to policy decisions of the Biden administration. Policy decisions, not laws passed by Congress, which the Biden administration refuses to enforce. Texas is fighting in federal court to be allowed to defend their borders and sovereignty. Of course, we're all border states now. Multiple states, including Tennessee, have joined together to beg and grovel before the federal courts. The Supreme Court allowed the Texas law to take effect that would have authorized Texas law enforcement to arrest illegals crossing the border, but the 5th District reinstated a hold on the law pending a final decision. The Biden administration says the Texas law violates federal immigration law and that the federal government controls immigration law. This despite the only thing that the Constitution gives the federal government supremacy over is naturalization law. Naturalization and immigration are two different things. The rest of that is court-created supremacy, and I want to say a little bit on that. Go look at the Constitution. You will only see references to naturalization. You won't see anything about immigration. You'll see just naturalization. And as a reminder, under the Articles of Confederation, different states had different requirements, different time requirements to become a citizen. So to ensure that everything was uniformed, that's why in the Constitution, they gave the federal government supremacy on the issue of naturalization, okay? They also expect the federal government to protect states from invasions, not lead those invasions. If the states don't do more than take the federal government to federal court, they are complicit with the destruction of our country. The states created the federal government to do specific delegated tasks. In doing so, they didn't give the federal government power to destroy them. Let's look at the whole idea of federal supremacy and what the founders actually created in 1787 that was ratified by the states. So if we'll put the supremacy clause up there real quick. I want to read that off for everybody, let everybody take a good look at it just to remind, because you always hear about the Supremacy Clause. This Constitution and the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. So what is supreme? Is it the federal laws? Is it the Supreme Court? This Constitution and the federal laws made in pursuance thereof, not just any federal law. And so what is the federal government allowed to make laws on? Well, if you look at the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8 lays out the primary powers of the federal government. Okay, it's not anything and everything. Otherwise, there'd be no reason to list. There'd be no reason to give enumerated powers if the federal government was going to be responsible to do anything and everything. There would have been no reason to list in Article 1, Section 10 the things that the states can't do if the federal government was going to rule on everything, if it was a top-down government. There would be no reason for that. So we have a few things that contradict. We have the Supremacy Clause. We have Article 1, Section 8. We have Article 1, Section 10. And then, of course, we have the Bill of Rights, and specifically the 9th and 10th Amendment. So let's back up just a little bit to the beginning of when our Constitution was created. So we had the Articles of Confederation. We finished up the Revolutionary War not too long before the Articles were actually, we actually approved the Articles of Confederation not too long before the actual fighting ended. Okay, the fighting ended in October of 1781. It was 2 years beyond that before we actually had the treaty. And when we had the treaty, every state was named in the Treaty of Paris because every state was a definitive, they were a distinct sovereign entity, all right? They were not one conglomeration of states. They were each distinct. So the Federalist, the Articles of Convention, good Lord, the Articles of Confederation had their problems. We have way too much government today, especially the federal government. Under the Articles of Confederation, it was actually too weak and it was causing a lot of problems. So they called the Constitutional Convention with the expressed intent of making them strong enough to meet the needs of the government. Well, as we know, they ended up going beyond that. They did more than amend. They created a new document, and you had to have 9 states ratified in order for it to become the law. So now, when you start with the convention, you have a group known as the Federalists, or became known as the Federalists. They wanted a stronger central government. The Anti-Federalists were concerned about recreating what they had just fought against. I know a lot of this is old hat. I've repeated some of this, but I want to go through all this because I think you need to think about this a little bit more. I think we've been sold a bill of goods over time. And obviously, what we have bought into, especially in the last 100 years, is not working. And it's not working because we're not actually following the plan. That's the deal. It's not a matter of a bad constitution. It's a matter of us not following it. And oh, by the way, anything on paper has to be enforced. You can't just have it on paper. There's no such thing as an effective paper barrier. The founders call those parchment barriers. All right, so the first thing that was introduced in the Constitutional Convention was known as the Virginia Plan, presented by the Federalists. It was a top-down plan where the federal government would pretty much call the shots. They could veto state laws if they wanted to on pretty much anything. Basically, they were told, no, we're not doing that. That's not going to happen. That was the first thing defeated in the Constitutional Convention was the Virginia Plan, the top-down plan. Okay, fast forward, you get through the convention. You're now in September. At the end of September, close to the final day when they were going to approve it, people started becoming concerned. The Anti-Federalists were very concerned that they had created something that was what they had just fought against. Certain clauses especially concerned them. The Supremacy Clause concerned them. The Necessary and Proper Clause concerned them. The General Welfare Clause concerned them. And they just thought we were creating something way too powerful here. That was their argument. And of course, now the Constitution has to be ratified by the states. You had to have 9 states to ratify to put it into effect. It would be in effect only for those 9 states, or ever how many that ratified it. So with the pushback from the Anti-Federalists, even though there had been an attempt at the end of the convention to add a Bill of Rights, and they decided not to add a Bill of Rights, now to get it ratified, key states like Virginia, like New York, like Massachusetts, like Pennsylvania, and others were saying, yeah, we think we need a Bill of Rights. We're concerned. And so there was a fear that some of these key states would not ratify, and have to retract that. It was not Pennsylvania, but it was New York, it was Virginia. Matter of fact, North Carolina didn't ratify till I believe 1790. There was concern, so Madison agreed in the first Congress, if you'll support this Constitution in the first Congress, we'll bring forth a Bill of Rights. So they brought forth, but you still had to get this before they could get it approved. During the ratification process, there were, competing arguments in the press at the time. The Anti-Federalists laying out all the things wrong with it, all of their fears about creating something too powerful. And the Federalists were basically explaining why that the document was a document of limited powers. And this was even before the Bill of Rights, okay? This was early on. This is before we had a Bill of Rights. And the Federalists were saying, hey, look, necessary and proper clause, that's just a reference back to the enumerated powers, okay? It's not additional powers. It's related to the enumerated powers. And general welfare, that just means whatever we do has to be good for everybody. We can't just go show favoritism in one section of the country or a specific business or a specific industry, things like that. And so there was this back and forth. And the Federalist Papers laid out that it was a limited government and that they said you didn't even need a Bill of Rights, okay? Well, like I say, the Anti-Federalists carried the day in terms of the ratification question. So there was an agreement made, first Congress, they passed the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights were just against the federal government. They were not limits on the state government. So considering that you had the Virginia plan rejected, you eventually had, in order to get the Constitution passed, you had to promise to add a Bill of Rights, and you have the apparently contradictory language. You've got the Supremacy Clause, which makes it sound as if the federal government is the final factor on everything, and of course the federal courts get to decide, because if you look at the Article 3 where it discusses the courts, if you read it, it sounds as if, yeah, okay, the courts are making the decision. Well, that does not make sense based on knowing that the top-down Virginia plan was rejected at the beginning of the convention. It does not make sense that if you look at the fact that there had to be a Bill of Rights agreed to in order for certain states to ratify, for key states to ratify, yet we're told that the federal government, all federal laws are supreme to all state laws, and that the Supreme Court is the final arbiter of everything, any constitutional question. So there's no way that that founding generation agreed to do that based on what happened at the time. Now remember, the Federalists did want a stronger federal government than the Anti-Federalists. So even though they made the arguments in the Federalist Papers that the government was limited and that you didn't need a Bill of Rights, even though there was a Bill of Rights added and ratified by 1791, if you think back to something we talked about on the show a couple weeks ago, the Alien and Sedition Acts under the Adams administration, he was the second president, so just a mere 7 years after the Bill of Rights were ratified, you have the Alien and Sedition Acts. So, well, the alien portion of that was that the president could decide if anybody from another country needed to be thrown out, which that's not the role of the president. And then you also had the Sedition Act, which made any kind of, any criticism of the president and certain other members of the government, that was made an offense, and made a crime. And there were people who were fined for that. There were people who were jailed for that. So even the founding generation violated the Bill of Rights. Okay, of course, later on that led to the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions by Madison and Jefferson. The point I'm trying to make is, at the end of the Constitutional Convention, even before the Bill of Rights, if you remember, Franklin was asked about, hey, Mr. Franklin, what have you given us? And he says, a republic if you can keep it. Even during the founding era, what we would consider the founding era, the people that wrote the plan, some of the same people that assured us that the federal government had enumerated and therefore limited powers, even they violated it. Once you put people in charge, sometimes things change, okay? If they can get by with violating things, they'll get by with it. It's up to us to keep them in their lane, okay? And so the usurpation of our Constitution, the abuse of power, the ignoring of the Bill of Rights, the ignoring of things in the Constitution that were intended to limit government power, especially federal government power, they were well on the way early on to undermining it. And it's ebbed and flowed over the years. Those who want a strong central government at different times have held sway, both whether you're talking the Supreme Court or whether you're talking the government, whether you're talking the legislature or the executive. All of those at different times throughout our history and currently have abused the power. It's always on us to push back. Now, obviously, voting is one of those ways, obviously not one of the most effective, considering things that have gone on. And it's not something that we can trust now. The best method for this is to require our states to push back. And I say this over and over again, but I'm telling you, short of shooting a bunch of people, the best thing is for the states to put the federal government back in its lane. That is the best way forward. That's the only way to make those limitations mean anything. And it's the only way to make sense of the document. Like I said, we're told that despite the Bill of Rights, despite the record from the convention, despite what the Federalist Papers said about limited federal government, we're told and have been told, and it's really been worse probably in the last 100 years, that the federal government, whatever it wants to do, it gets to do because federal laws trump state laws, and the Supreme Court's the final authority on all questions of the Constitution. Well, if you look at one of the first documents written after the ratification, it was written by a guy named St. George Tucker, and he was a contemporary of Madison and Jefferson. He was not actually at the convention. He was at the Annapolis Convention, but not in the Philadelphia Convention. And he was a judge in Virginia, and I think he later taught at one of the universities. He did one of the first treatise on the Constitution and what it meant. And I think that his understanding of it makes the most sense. And that is, when in the Constitution, when it lays out the supremacy doctrine, the supremacy clause, when it says this Constitution, it applies just to the enumerated powers in the federal Constitution. In other words, the supremacy and the fact that you'll have a Supreme Court to intervene if there's a conflict has to do just with the powers enumerated in the Constitution. And if you remember, the 9th and 10th Amendment, to clarify, made it clear that anything that was not enumerated and delegated to the federal government remained with the states and or the people. Now, the 9th Amendment, the reason it's worded a little bit different. It says the enumeration of the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. That was so that nobody said, well, you don't have this right because it's not listed in the Constitution. The point was, if there's rights out there not defined, they belong to the people and to the state, not to the federal government. And then the 10th Amendment says powers not delegated to the federal government by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states, respectively, or to the people. So that was just to clarify, hey, anything not listed in this document as a delegated power to the federal government remains with the states. The police powers, those things remain at the state level, not at the federal level. So what St. George Tucker's interpretation of the Constitution was, the only thing that the federal government is supreme is in those powers delegated to it. Now, in some cases, there would be concurrent powers. Concurrent power is something that the state could also exercise. But that is a legitimate case with a concurrent power where your federal court would come in case, or in this case, the Supreme Court, because originally that's all we had was the Supreme Court. And that's where they would come in. Not for the Supreme Court to be deciding everything down at the state level. Not, oh, we can't have prayer in school because the Supreme Court said, or we have to allow abortion because the Supreme Court said. Now, I understand after the Civil War, you get the 14th Amendment. That did expand the federal government's reach. Now, I hesitate to say legitimately, because if you read the history of the ratification of the 14th Amendment, you might question it, all right? But all the same, that's what we're operating under. But that did not wipe out all the enumerated powers in Article 1, Section 8. That did not void the 9th Amendment, did not void the 10th Amendment, okay? It essentially took Article 4 of the Constitution. I don't have a slide for that. That was basically your life, liberty, and property clause, the immunities and, it escapes me, privileges and immunities clause of the fourth article of Article 4 of the Constitution. It essentially that, and then it of course mentions due process, which means within a state, under the 14th Amendment, within a state, you couldn't have one set of rules for one group of citizens and another group for another. And that was primarily directed initially at the recently freed slaves. That's who it was directly for. However, it made it clear it applied to everybody. You had to have, across the board, one system. You couldn't have two different standards of justice. Everybody had to have access to the courts. Everybody had a right to own property. Everybody had a right to go to another state. You could go to another state, and just like under Article 4, somebody from Virginia could go to Maryland, and they would have all the same rights and privileges as those citizens there. Same thing under the 14th. That meant that not only the freed slaves, but any citizen could go to any other state, and they would have all the privileges and immunities. So we've gone, of course, since that time, especially since starting about 60 years after the 14th Amendment, that's when the Supreme Court just started adding more and more power, reinterpreting things, and just taking power for themselves and power for the federal government. So we've got the only peaceful way to remedy that. You know, we either accept and become slaves, or peacefully is to force our state to stand up and nullify unconstitutional federal actions. Whether that federal action be legislation, whether it be a Supreme Court decision, whether it be a federal regulation, you name it. That's the only way to do it. And so our country, I don't see things getting better as long as we allow our state to tell us, well, it's a federal issue, we can't do anything about it. As long as our state is willing to allow us to be invaded by all these people that the federal government's bringing over, and think that the only thing that they can do about it is go to the federal court and beg, that's ridiculous. We should do anything and everything. Now, it's not encouraging after what I told you earlier today, that we can't get our state to stand up for basic things. We can't get them to stand up for our state constitution, much less our federal Constitution, much less the 9th and 10th Amendment. But the best way is still to try and force our states to do that. Some way, somehow, we have to stay on them. It's an election year. I would encourage everybody to find out if they're running for the state house or state senate, where they stand on the 10th Amendment. What do they think about nullification? Because if they don't believe in the 10th and won't stand up for the 10th, if they don't think nullification is viable, they're not going to stand up for you. They're just going to use the same old excuse of that's the federal government, there's nothing we can do about it. And we're not going to have more freedom, and more importantly, our kids and our grandkids are not going to have more freedom, they're going to have less. So we can continue to act as if our Constitution is a suicide pact that we have no control over and that all we can do is beg, or we can go back and say, hey, you know what? The only way this document makes sense is if the powers that are enumerated to the federal government, if that's all they're allowed to exercise, and if our states intervene when they go over that, whether it be legislatively, whether it be an executive order, whether it be the court, whether it be a federal regulation. So things have just gotten worse and worse with our federal government, with our Supreme Court. Our last best hope, well, divine intervention, of course, and forcing our states to stand up. I want to thank you all for taking the time to watch our program tonight. Please be sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons, as well as the notification bell to stay informed about upcoming shows. As a reminder, you can now listen to us as a podcast on Spreaker.com. You can find all the audio-only podcast.com of your favorite episodes on our website, tninformer.com, or do a search for TN Informer on Spreaker.com, where you can also download the Spreaker app for Android or Apple phones. We're also excited to announce the Tennessee Informer podcast are now available to listen to on iHeartRadio, Spotify, and other popular podcast platforms. Please take a moment to check out and follow our Facebook page at TN Informer. We'll be posting news and information about upcoming shows on there, as well as on our website, tninformer.com, where you can also sign up for a weekly newsletter. We're also on Twitter now as well, twitter.com/TNinformer. Please share us with your friends so they can stay up to date on all the conservative political news and issues coming out of our state. Next week, our special guest will be Walter Donald Kennedy, co-author with his brother, James Ronald Kennedy, of the book, The South Was Right. It's an updated edition for the 21st century. Listen and learn about all the things you don't know about the real causes of Civil War. Hope you'll join us. Thank you again for tuning in tonight. We appreciate your support. That's it for now. Good night from Paris, Tennessee, that is.